and welcome back. Today, I don't have an interesting dog fact for you because I can't think of any. I'm here with my friend Rachel again. You have already met her. Rachel, would you like to share an interesting or fun animal anecdote to start us off?
I guess just a reflection. I don't think I realized how territorial cats are until we recently got a third cat to join the first two who are siblings, so grew up together. Two of the three are alpha cats and are very territorial and like to make their space and dominance known. It's taken maybe 8 months for the cats to more or less get used to one another and give each other the space that they need. But on occasion, one gets too close to the other and that's it. There's hissing and yelling and screaming and peeing everywhere. So, all of that to be said, I'll tell the embarrassing Galleta story. She was spooked by Lila, who is, those are the two dominant cats, but Lila is the more senior cat in the household. She must have jumped out or moved too quickly, and Galleta, the newer one, but also dominant, ran down the hallway. We have a very long hallway, so it sounds like horses running, I'm sure for our neighbors below, and in her moment of panic, tried to squeeze between the fridge and the sink area, which she used to be able to fit in easily, but has grown now since and couldn't fit in easily. And in her moment of fear and panic, peed all over the floor before she squeezed in behind the fridge. So I guess those are two stories that are not exactly connected. I have a lot to say about Galleta and Lila's relationship, but cats are territorial, and that does not end, it seems. So they mostly tolerate each other, which is good, though.
Do you think they would not choose to be housemates?
They would not choose. No, Lila would be like, fuck no. She is not belong here. I'm clearly the queen.
Aww. Now let's get to our topic. Today we do have one that I wanted to reflect on with Rachel, because Rachel is just someone who's a really good bouncing ideas off of each other friend for me. Lately, I've seen 2 little documentaries about foreigners moving to Mexico City and gentrifying it. And then I talked about this with a friend who said, well, it's kind of a systemic issue and not a personal issue. And then I thought about the difference between systemic and personal issues some more, and thought that actually those show up in so many different contexts. Recognizing that a systemic issue intersects with a personal decision we're trying to make does not give us an answer as to what that decision should be. For example, if I'm living in Austria and I'm thinking of moving to Mexico and I'm aware of the fact that gentrification is an issue, should that fact that I'm aware of it impact my choice whether to move to Mexico City or not? So should it impact my personal decision? And I think sometimes in some scenarios it should and in others it shouldn't. But also I feel like the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves probably lead us to either take that into consideration or not.
Yeah. I was thinking of the phrase or this idea that the personal is political. It's hard to distinguish or draw the line between something that's systemic or a larger issue and personal choice, because we grow up within systems, right? And we're shaped by those systems. And the choices we make are shaped in part by the systems at play around us, within us, that we're a part of, etc. And where we draw the line, I think, also varies, right? What we had spoken about before we started recording of, well, for some folks, moving to Mexico City is potentially about wanting to live in a city but not being able to afford living in a larger city in the U.S. and thinking of that as a systemic issue, which is a very valid point. And if affordability were not an issue in the U.S., if salaries were higher, if cities in the U.S. were gentrified, or if there was affordable housing for all, people perhaps wouldn't make the decision to leave. I don't know if I answered any of those questions, but reflecting back.
Yeah. Watching both of these documentaries, they gave me like this icky feeling. I think it is because I did make the choice to move to Latin America from a higher income country, and I am taking advantage of that because I'm earning dollars and spending pesos. So I made that personal choice. The reason that I'm having this unfair advantage is the fact that there is a systemic issue, which is that we live in this capitalist society that is fundamentally unfair. And also the fact that I'm telling myself a story about myself. I know that I like to cast myself in the role of someone who makes choices. And I kind of refuse the victim role if I can, anytime I can, because I really don't like that. So the story I tell myself about moving to Latin America is I've never seen myself as someone who will stay in Europe. I always wanted to move abroad, and I just happened to fall in love with this part of the world. And then this other friend has a very different story. They say they were economically displaced and basically had to leave, and they can afford to live in Mexico. So they have a different story in which they are, in effect, a victim of the system. In the story that I am telling myself, I'm not a victim of the system. I'm someone who made a choice. Mm-hmm. There's a part of me that feels responsible for that choice and the impact it may have on others. I mean, of course, I'm one person and I don't have a big impact on anyone. But I don't feel like I was forced to move here for economic reasons, even though if I wanted to live in Vienna today, I would have to make a lot more money than I do now. So I could tell myself the story where I'm a victim too, but I just don't.
Well, thinking about privilege and power and identity, it's easy, at least for me to think or to say or to feel like, okay, well, I come from the US, I'm white, I come from a middle to upper class background, and therefore I am always going to represent the oppressor and the colonizer, and I have to hold that narrative or hold that story because I'm making the choice to do this, or I chose to come here not out of necessity but out of desire. And if I let go of that sense of responsibility, not that I'm necessarily doing anything with it, but if I let go of that, then I feel more guilt. So I have to at least hold that narrative or be aware of that narrative to not maybe offset the guilt, or at least to frame it in a different way, like conscientious guilt versus, I'm not sure.
That is such an interesting thought. Yeah, I think I have to do that too. I am aware that I come from a privileged background. The friend I mentioned does not come from a privileged background, so maybe for them it's easier to tell a different story. I mean, they're also white and a cis-het guy from the US, so they do have a lot of privilege, but they did not grow up with economic privilege. Mm-hmm. So there's at least one part of the guilt that maybe you and I are holding and they don't.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think this also ties into the Jewish identity component, because I think now there's a lot of leftist Jews, at least from the U.S., that feel like, okay, we've been given large amounts of power in recent years, and as such, we're far enough away from the conflict physically and from the Holocaust, and even though it's still present, we're removed enough to be able to criticize our own privilege and power. And there's almost a need to do that, I think, to offset some of our not necessarily active participation in, but due to our privilege and power at the moment, implication in systems of injustice. And so it's almost like acknowledging that power and saying, okay, we have to do something with it. But it's a very specific and unique group of Jews that live in wealthy, predominantly white parts of the United States that are physically far enough removed from the conflict and from grandparents that might have been affected by the Holocaust directly, to say that. I don't know, I think that is a piece of the puzzle, at least in the discourse and narratives that we've created, and that's unique to this specific period in time. You know, it didn't exist to the same extent 50 years ago, and it doesn't exist for people in other physical contexts. So I think it's very unique to a particular subgroup of the population, and I think it's very tied to a similar sensation of acknowledging power and privilege.
Yeah.
And kind of how that impacts the decisions that we make.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the same context, I feel like I'm automatically always on the side of the perpetrator because I'm not Jewish and I'm from Austria. If I was Jewish, I may not be around today because my great-grandparents might have died. And I know what that means and what that says about my great-grandparents who I never met in person, but my grandmother, for example, she was 14 or something when Austria became part of the German Reich, and she liked going to that Bund Deutscher Mädchen, which is like it was the equivalent for girls of the Hitlerjugend. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like she has fond memories of that. Or she used to. She's not alive anymore. She also told me, because of course she got older, that time passed, and she had time to reflect on what had happened. She told me that her father, who would be my great-grandfather, was initially against his kids joining the Hitlerjugend and the Bund Deutscher Mädchen. But everyone did, and all their friends did, and eventually he was like, well, I guess you can, right? So just knowing that about my ancestors, makes me today feel like I can't go to a Free Palestine protest, for example, because I feel like I would automatically be read as someone saying something anti-Semitic. Would really, really have to know who is putting on that protest and what message they're trying to send in order to feel comfortable going there. Because I feel like I'm holding that generational guilt almost.
Yeah.
Guilt isn't helping anyone, of course, but it's weird. And the current political climate is just making me aware of it. Like, usually it's not something I think about, but of course now I do.
Yeah. I think all of these, going back to this idea of personal versus systemic, everything we do and the ways that we think and the ways that we were raised and our ideas about the world come from far before us, right? And the context in which we were raised and the collective experiences as a group of people, and how individually we can have such different experiences of the same thing based on these larger structures that we have been a part of. And across generations, across time, too, right? It's not like I personally experienced this or I personally lived through this, but this is a story that's been passed down, or this is a part of my heritage or ancestry or my grandparents or great-grandparents, and we hold on to that, or we feel connected to it, or it directs us in a particular way.
Yeah, I think it's also, maybe we both grew up with economic privilege, but also in very different contexts, because the Austria I grew up in still had all these old Nazis that are now dying. It wasn't even a secret, right? You knew about them. You knew who they were.
Yeah.
Like my grandmother's neighbor, who... There are things that I have forgotten because he died a long time ago when I was a teenager. But just now thinking back, I'm like, wow. He held horrible beliefs and collected horrible things and was able to say that out loud during a time I was already alive. That distance between the present and the past, for me, does not feel like that is that much distance.
It isn't. Ultimately it isn't, yeah.
I remember being a 14-year-old, like, just kind of standing there with my mouth open and being like, what? And I guess then unpacking it with my parents, who luckily, and of course, and it's not of course, but luckily did not share this particular person's belief. And I had people to unpack these things with as a kid, but it feels very close still.
Yeah, absolutely. It is close.
Yeah.
It is in many ways to many of us, and I think that's why it's particularly heated for folks outside of those directly involved in the war, right, or the genocide, or in the current physical location and acts that are going on, however you choose to name them, in ways that a lot of us, at least of our generation, aren't familiar with at all.
Yeah. Actually, in general, how we choose to engage with an issue or not, I do think it is tied to the story we tell ourselves, which is, of course, partially influenced by the systems and partially influenced by who our family was when we were growing up and who our peers were. And also random little things, as in who we ended up sitting next to in school. I feel like our own personal past, the one that we actually lived and witnessed, it's like this, what is it called? The kettle of a witch?
Cauldron, yeah.
It's like this cauldron, which has all these things in it. Like the eyes of a, I don't know.
Sheep.
Yeah, the eyes of a sheep and...
a chicken's foot.
Yeah, and like some part of a virgin. And
any part of a virgin.
I don't know what it is until you...
I don't remember it.
Like it is something virgin, right?
I think so.
And like probably onions and water and tequila and I don't know what else. Cauldron.
Mezcal, because we're in Mexico.
Yeah. All these things are in this cauldron and it's on this fire and it's very dark around. So we don't really see very well what's in the cauldron. But as we are trying to make sense, and we make sense by telling ourselves stories that are coherent, because otherwise nothing would make sense to us. Like, I feel like that's a unique human thing that we have to do. We fish and we pick the things out of the cauldron that we want to be part of our story and throw the rest back inside. And then we line them up neatly in a row, and then that's the story we are telling. And that's the story we are basing our decisions today, that we're making today on.
Yeah.
At least to a part. But at the same time, I feel like it's important to be aware of the fact that we could have taken different objects out of that same cauldron and come to a different story.
Do you think we can at what point do we create these stories and can we change them? And if so, is it a frequent process? Is it infrequent? At what point is something different enough to distinguish it as a unique story? Or do you think it's something that we create and it's fixed to some extent.
Maybe to some extent, but I remember reading, and I don't remember where, it may actually have been some journal article, that memory changes. Mm-hmm. So it's like this folder on your computer, and every time you open it, you edit it.
Yeah.
Even if you're not aware of it. So every time you open that memory and think about that thing, it changes. So it's not fixed. Even when you're not aware of it, or even when you specifically do not want to change it, you're still changing it every time you open it.
So we're using multiple stories to guide us. I mean, every time we do something, it's based on a slightly different version of a story, potentially.
Yeah, I think so.
Right? I mean, we're always accessing our memories.
Yeah, and always through the lens of who we are today. And who we are today is probably not the same person we were when we last accessed that memory.
Yeah? But I do think there are certain threads of these stories that we tell that are prominent, at least that I will say, oh, this is because of this. And I'm like, oh yeah, I've come to that conclusion before many times. Or that's a common thread that I've told myself. So, maybe there are moving pieces, but also kind of deeper threads, whether they come from our childhood or things that our parents told us as kind of deeper, less malleable pieces.
That's true. And I assume there are probably developmental periods in our childhood when things are written more deeply into our brain, so they're harder to erase or change.
Yeah, absolutely.
We probably don't question them and are not aware of what is on that level, but it's probably there.
I'm curious how we could illustrate or lay these stories out in a visual way to see variations of them, but also for us as individuals to acknowledge, because I feel like we live a particular way based on these stories, but we don't always know what these stories are, right?
Yeah.
So what do they look like?
And at the same time, just also acknowledging that there are so many stories that can be told about one and the same event, for example, depending on what angle you're looking at it from or who you are. I still believe it is really important to acknowledge that there are certain truths or historical truths, again, going back to the collective history, that you can't deny happened, for example.
Mm-hmm. But your view of them changes depending on your position. I was just talking, my mom does facilitation work around currently the conflict, going back to that, and there's an image that she used in a presentation yesterday of someone standing, like me and you, for example, facing each other, and there's a 6 on the floor. And in my direction it's a 6. In your direction, what is it?
It's a 9.
So if we're always in the positions we're in now, are we ever going to see the same truth? No, I mean, it's physically impossible unless I recognize that, oh, I see it as this, but you don't, right?
Yeah.
But I can't see what you're seeing.
Yeah.
And it's always going to look different.
Yeah. I actually know that image, but it is a M versus a W.
Okay, yeah.
In the image I'm familiar with. Okay, so... Which is interesting, that also, like, the 6 and the 9 work just the same.
Changing the story again.
Yeah. Isn't that what the theory of mind, is that what it means? That we are able to put ourselves into the shoes of someone else as humans?
I don't know.
I think so.
I'm not sure.
We're still standing where we're standing. Supposedly, I should be able, or could be able, or am I able to, like, imagine what, like, my 3D imagination is so terrible, what it would look like from your point of view.
Right.
And acknowledge that. Not only that it is probably different, but also getting closer to what you're seeing. Even if I don't see that myself, can I see that you would be seeing that?
Well, I think in the WM or 6 and 9 scenario, there's no emotion and trauma and pain wrapped up in the 6 or the 9 or the M or the W, right?
That's true, yeah.
And so it's maybe easier for me to say, I see a 6. But I could see how if I were to be in your position, it would look different. Because there's no triggers there in this particular situation. But I think when there's, in this particular conflict or in many other situations, if the 6 is family members that have been killed and the 9 is also family members that have been killed for a different reason or a different context or, it's hard to get past the initial pain, suffering, trauma, triggers of what I'm seeing and feeling to acknowledge your position, even if ultimately they're one and the same. Right? Yeah. And my mom was talking about dialogue is about getting to the underlying point of shared values. And if the shared value is well-being for my family, ultimately we both share that. Or having a place to live that I can call my own. Yeah. Right? Ultimately the values are very similar, but to get to that, you have to go beyond your own personal suffering and pain and trauma. And that's really hard.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah, because as long as it's an M or a W, detached from anything emotional or personal, it would be a lot easier.
But having that understanding from a non-emotional point of view, I think is important to then be able to apply it in a more emotional situation, right?
Yeah. Also, maybe to recognize that, okay, this is not something we can fix ourselves.
Right.
Because we're both so emotionally wrapped up in this. So we need someone like your mom to come in and mediate, right?
And also, that goes back to the personal versus systemic, too. What can I do? I could maybe get in your position and see the 9 or understand your feelings, but ultimately, is that enough? These things are so much larger than us that, this idea of what can we do? Is it something much larger than us that even if we're able to have empathy and have understanding and have dialogue, it doesn't go deep enough, it doesn't go large enough on the systemic level to be able to have an impact?
Yeah, and also me being able to take your point of view is not me doing anything, right? Mm-hmm. Systems only change by things that actually happen, not by personal private thoughts that are in our own heads. It has to go somehow beyond that.
Right. But also personal, private thoughts can become thoughts that are shared with any community, thoughts that are shared with their family.
Yeah, and then there are not just thoughts anymore. Then they are more than that. Yeah, they're
stories we tell ourselves, narratives.
No, then they're stories we share with others.
Yeah.
Rather than just stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah. We've spoken about, what can we do? What's enough? What do we do with? Okay, I'm here. I moved here. I'm aware that my presence has an impact on a systemic level, on a personal level. Is it enough to just have these conversations or have these slightly reframed narratives, or is it really, in the grand scheme of things, just perpetuating these larger systemic issues?
Yeah.
And I would hope that it's not just perpetuating these larger systemic issues from a selfish perspective, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's all tied together.
It is all tied together, and I think in the end, after having reflected specifically on the moving to Mexico or living in Mexico City issue, recently I passed through New York City, and I was like, wow, New York City is great. It's not like I've spent enough time there, but it feels very rich and diverse and has very walkable parts, like Mexico City does. It has functioning public transport. It's definitely got a thriving queer community. There are many things about it that would have a similar allure, is that a word?
Mm-hmm. Allure, yeah.
Yeah, as Mexico City, but even if I was a U.S. citizen, I could not afford to live in New York.
So if affordability wasn't an issue...
Or in any place I would want to live in.
So if affordability wasn't an issue and you were to live in New York City, for example, would you have the same inner conflict about, or would you think similarly or differently about your place there versus here?
I don't know, but I have a different
yes, agreed.
story. And I also don't think I would pick. I don't know if I would even if I would actually want to live there. I don't know. I would have to spend way more time there, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
But when my ex had an internship in the Bay Area, I went there with him. I liked that part of the U.S. And he was offered a permanent position at that company where he did his internship. Mm-hmm. That would mean that he would stop his PhD and work for them and get the kind of salary that you get at Google and Facebook, et cetera, and you can afford to live in the Bay Area relatively well.
Yeah.
I was a dog trainer. So, I don't have the income to live in the Bay Area on a permanent basis, but I liked it there. Mm-hmm. And I thought about it. He's a U.S. citizen, so we would have had to get married. We would have had to get married in order for me to even be able to live there, right? But also, it's really important to me to do what I'm passionate about for a living, and that is training dogs. Mm-hmm. That is never going to make enough money for me to be able to live in the Bay Area. So I would be economically dependent on him if I made that choice.
Yeah.
I'm answering a question you did not ask.
No, it's
but
okay.
that was one of the first things that came to mind. And
Yeah.
then I wondered, me really liking it here and liking it better than living in Vienna, would I trade that for that economic dependence?
Mm-hmm.
And I never found an answer because he decided anyways that he wanted to definitely finish his PhD at the University of Vienna. So
bye Bay Area.
So that was bye, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what my answer would be. I know what it would be today. Today it would be no. I would not be willing to trade my economic independence.
I was going to say, knowing you now, I would say, There's no way you would do that.
But it was a short period. I might have come to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
Had it been on the table longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would not.
Independent person that you are. And I
For better or worse.
we're all a little bit stubborn, so.
Yeah. I'm reading this book right now, and think it's called Capitalism and the communities. Like, you know what I mean? To make something communal.
Huh.
What's the word?
I don't even know if that's a word. Communication?
Communication, yes. And it is a part of that title. I don't know if it's a word or if the author made it up. It's Capitalism and the Communification of Care. I heard an interview with that author and found it really interesting, and then I read the book. Or am reading the book now. Mm-hmm. They argue that we can only be free, or truly free as humans, if they're Marxists. We have to get rid of capitalism and the family, which is interesting because I read the book your sister recommended like a couple months ago, which was called Abolition Family. And it's also an anti-capitalist book. This author goes pretty deep in the history of how the nuclear family is wrapped up in capitalism and how it creates dependencies. What was this quote that really stood out to me? If you can't leave, you cannot choose to stay. And so their argument is that in order to form free relationships and have the love that we actually want to have freely, we cannot be tied into that capitalist system that the family is often a part of, because there is economic dependency a lot of the time.
Absolutely, yeah.
Or a dependency of a caregiver relationship, right? If I'm not able to work and you are, and we're in a relationship, then I cannot leave that relationship because who else would take care of me?
Right. So therefore by default.
By default, it doesn't really matter if I love you or not. And you being a good person, it doesn't really matter if you love me or not. Because you know that if you left me, I would end up in the streets. And you can't do that because that would be against your values, right? So in order for that to not be an issue, we really need to completely reform the systems that we're entrapped in.
Right. And that's because legally, if you're married, you can have these laws that connect you financially. They are larger systems at play, not just the expectation or idea that if we're together, we share assets. I mean, which, you can make different choices, but legally binding in certain contexts. You owe someone a certain amount if you divorce. And so it does become part of the capital system very concretely.
I'm probably only touching the surface of this because I have not really engaged with this topic a lot in the past, but I'm really curious about it now. This text speaks to me especially because when you grow up in Austria, your high school reading list is a lot of Marx. And the Communist Manifesto, and then I read the Capital and stuff like that. And there are many allusions to that. And it's been so many years since I read these books.
And it's time to bring them back.
So it's interesting to
read their Capital the Communist Manifesto in Spanish.
Well, the Communist Manifesto, because it's a lot shorter.
Okay, all right, I'll take that.
I remember things that I thought about when I read them the first time, and now this book came out fairly recently. It has a new context, and it's very convincing to me. I want to dive deeper there and learn more about that. We're not part of a system, or the capitalist system is definitely not one that provides universal basic income based on the fact of your humanity, right? Which is how we would be free to actually make choices to be with whoever we want or to leave whenever we want, because we would know that everyone is taken care of independently of what we contribute in that relationship. But that's not the system we're in.
So everything's systemic then. There's so many threads of conversation going on here, but they're all woven together.
Everything is systemic. But also everything is personal. And some things are personal, but not for me, but there for you, or there for you and not for me.
Because of our stories that are different.
Everything is connected, and that, Now I'm also thinking about the things that are not connected, like the things that we need to walk away from, right? Let's say, for example, certain aspects from my relationship with my mother that I have over the last couple of years slowly come to understand that some of the issues that we have had for as long as I can remember, they really are not about me. They're her shit to figure out or not figure out. And it's not up to me if she will figure them out or not. Even though I'm being woven into these stories.
They're not yours,
They're not mine. Sometimes there is something that's very heavy and it's not yours to carry. You can if you want to, but you can also not. Because it's not your own baggage.
Well, couldn't the same be said of collective memories or larger narratives of a community or of a country, or speaking of what you just mentioned about your grandmother, or is that something that we can also untie ourselves from? That's
a really good question. I don't feel I will ever want to untie myself from my grandmother's and great-grandparents' actions because that feels like it's a question of morality versus the relationship with my mother does not feel as impactful in the grand scheme of things. So I can feel like I'm congruent with my own values and walk away from that relationship with my mother, but I can't do that with that collective history in the same way.
Is that because of a story that you tell yourself?
Probably. Very likely.
Yeah?
I have to think some more to tell you what the story is, but it probably is. From an outsider's perspective, do you see that same difference or do you not?
I mean, it makes sense to me, but also we choose for some reason or another what our ethics and values are, right?
Yeah.
So we could also unchoose that or choose something else just as easily, unless you think values and ethics and morals are something innate that we need.
No, I don't think they are, and I do think they change over time, or at least I know they have for me. Mm-hmm. The reason I know that is that I've been reading Brené Brown for a few years, and every once in a while I come about Brené Brown's questions about values, and there's this worksheet where you're supposed to find 2 core values. There are many values on that sheet, but you're supposed to get down to 2 that are most important, and I have done this over the last, I don't know how many years, several times, and they've changed. Yeah. It's related things, but not exactly the same thing. It's not that it changed completely, but it shifted a little bit in this direction, a little bit in that direction, and now I would give it a different name or label. Yeah. Yeah. What do you think?
I'll have to do the worksheet.
Oh yeah, I'll send you the worksheet. Or it's online.
I'm curious. Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think those things are fixed. Especially, I think our context and circumstance does shift things sometimes more drastically than others, but I do think it can be drastic depending on one's experience.
Yeah. I think it shifts even without very impactful experiences, but certain experiences probably make it shift more drastically.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Well, on that note,
I have lots to think about. I was both thinking about where to take that and also listening to the rain, which is soothing and calming and grounding. Because I think we could definitely kind of go in not in circles, but different sort of
ellipses.
Yeah.
Different geometrical shapes.
Yeah. This movement.
Oh, the figure 8, the kind of eternity symbol.
Yeah, exactly. Where nothing really ends and it kind of just weaves back around again. It makes me think of one of my friends always, jokes about or brings up this phrase that I told her at one point, but she brings it up for lots of things when we speak, which is not that frequently, but where is the line, right? And
where's the line?
Where's the line? Like between...
The line or the lion?
I like the lion. No, the line, like L-I-N-E. Where's the lion?
Okay.
Between one thing and another, right? And the whole purpose of the statement is that there is none, or it's ever shifting, so you can't really ever find it, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps the lion is also ever shifting if we're in the jungle. So we can rephrase that. I like the imagery of that better. It's a little less philosophical. But whenever we have conversations that kind of go back and forth in this weaving, loopy way, you know, that's the where's the lion? Where's the lion? In that we're never going to end. There's no ending, right? There's no finite point that divides.
Unless, I guess, we draw a line. Can we draw a line?
Well, one could. I think I don't. I have a tendency not to, but yeah, you can draw as many lines as you want.
Have you drawn a lion?
I have drawn lions as well. Perhaps not as well as the lions.
I have to think about whether I'm into drawing lines or not.
Lions or lions?
I think in some scenarios, probably. Or if you like,
boundary.
For example, to set a boundary. A boundary is a line.
Or defining something.
Or if you leave your job, for example, because many little things have built up. That is a line.
I guess if we're defining a line as a clear...
a boundary?
A boundary or a position, or maybe thinking about it as in terms of mathematics, like clear, like this is this.
Yeah.
Versus the ability to philosophize things in which there's not a 2 + 2 = 4 type scenario.
Right. Yeah.
Whether that's an answer or a division or a boundary or a fact or however you want to define it.
I think it depends on the issue at hand. What kind of line is the appropriate one to use? And sometimes there is a lion.
Also, hiding behind the line.
Yeah. Or somewhere else. You never know.
That's what makes it so exciting.
Yeah. Other times, This is a very random shout out to you, Austin. There is a mood lightning turtle.
A mood lightning turtle or a moon lightning turtle?
Mood. A turtle. A turtle.
A mood. Moon. No mood.
Mood. M-O-O-D.
Lightning. Turtle.
Yes. A turtle that lightens your mood.
Oh, lightening, not lightning. Like lightening. Like lightning, like makes lighter versus lightning in the sky.
Yes,
which also makes lighter.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
I was thinking like a lightning bolt, but mood lightning turtle. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like the little. Have you ever seen this? When the awkward turtle came out.
No, is that what you do when there's an awkward silence?
I at one point 5 or 10 years ago was a thing. I don't.
I do know that, but why? Because someone, maybe that was you, told me about it.
I don't know, but it does lighten your mood, and it is a turtle. What's Austin's mood lightening turtle about?
It's a tortoise.
A real one?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a real one. I think a tortoise is the only kind of turtle that lives entirely on land.
I think so.
I believe all other turtles are at least partially aquatic, even though some of them may be able to breathe air too.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I'm not a turtle expert.
Me neither. I think they're cool.
They are.
What about, wait.
I asked you what's the story behind this?
Oh yeah.
And you said it was a tortoise, but what about the tortoise?
Oh, I was just in need of some mood lightening. But it could be a moon lightning turtle too.
Oh my. Well, on that note, I'm glad we've come to lighter topics of conversation and also a bit of laughter hidden between the challenges that we face and whether they're systemic or personal or both.
Yeah. Well, let's end on that note, but let me just give you an opportunity again to let people know where to find you on the internet, if you want to be found. Unless you want to hide behind a lion or a lion.
You can find me on the internet. I have a lot of art on a website that is community in English and then arte in Spanish. Comuniarte. I don't even remember. I'll check. Well, while I'm checking, my Instagram is RFINKLES. Rfinkles. Oh, communityarte.com. There's some of my artwork. But thank you. Thank you, as always, for the space and the thoughts and the reflection. And to those that are listening, for listening. And to Austin and Mood Lightning Turtle.
Thank you for coming on again. And everyone else out there who has a dog, happy training.
Bye.
Bye.
recognizing that a systemic issue intersects with a personal decision we're trying to make does not give us an answer as to what that decision should be.